Well, House of Commons is really exciting. It's the best thing on TV right now. I can't expect the Conservatives to keep this level of highly entertainment, but they're getting things done too. It's not just, fluff in the air. But question period, and after that we have some statements by members, and they're all relevant. Stay tuned to watch
Oral
this.
questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Portage-Lisker.
Pandemic is here, and most Canadians who may come up in a contact tracing list can't afford to take 2 or 3 weeks off to get tested for COVID. Right. Last March, the Prime Minister promised that rapid COVID testing for Canadians would be a top priority. Half a year and $500 billion later, Canadian families still have to wait in line for hours and sometimes days to get tested. Why is the Prime Minister failing Canadians on this vital test during the pandemic?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way we've been working with the provinces and territories on increasing testing across the country. We provided $19 billion through the Safe Restart Agreement to increase testing capacity, amongst other things. We procured supplies and provided resources to help the provinces with testing, contact tracing, and data. I've held 18 meetings with the First Ministers over the course of the pandemic. We'll continue to do what it takes to keep Canadians safe, ensure our scientists have all the tools necessary to rapidly approve the tests that are safe for Canadians.
The honourable member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister locked the doors of Parliament to cover up his WE scandal under the guise of a speech from the throne which would address the pandemic. But the throne speech was nothing but a litany of recycled Liberal broken promises that leaves countless numbers of people behind. This Prime Minister has no plan to deal with the health crisis, no plan to deal with job losses, and no plan to address divisions in our country. So why did the Prime Minister waste all of this time just to cover up his scandal instead of using it to help Canadians?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the pandemic is the most serious public health crisis Canada has ever faced. The last 6 months have revealed fundamental gaps in our society and in countries around the world. For those who are already struggling, the pandemic has been even more difficult, so we must address the challenges of today and support vulnerable people for the future. We will take bold action on health, on the economy, on equality, and on the environment. Those are the things that Canadians expect while we continue to have their backs through this pandemic and chart a better course for a brighter future for all Canadians.
Honourable member for Portage-Lisker.
But the Prime Minister's throne speech was nothing more than an attempt to change the channel on his corrupt government's actions. Right. The speech was almost 7,000 words long, but mentioned Canada's natural resources only once. There was no mention of unionized oil and gas workers in Alberta, no plan for forestry workers in Quebec and BC, and farmers, well, all they can expect is more carbon tax. Yeah. So why did the Prime Minister knowingly leave millions of Canadians behind?
Why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this pandemic, we've been there for Canadians right across the country. Almost 9 million people received the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and with the measures we're putting forward today, we're actually going to continue to be able to support the millions who continue to be out of work, looking for work, but unable to find it because our economy is still in recovery. We've also stepped up in supporting small businesses with extending the Canada Emergency Business Account and extending the wage subsidy. These are the things that are going to get our economy going by supporting Canadians through this pandemic.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the throne speech was a typically Liberal speech. They're just creating disputes with provinces. And the speech wasn't even over when the Premier of Quebec already said that he was disappointed in the speech because the Liberal government once again has interfered in provincial jurisdiction, notably in health. And this is unacceptable. But this is the Liberal signature. How come the Liberal government of the Prime Minister is not respecting provincial jurisdiction and let the provinces take care of health and he take care of Canadians' concerns? I regret, Mr. Speaker, to hear the member saying that the federal government doesn't have its place in protecting seniors. The Premier didn't mind sending us to send in the military to help seniors in long-term care. And we're always going to be there to support our seniors. We're going to work in partnership with the provinces, all provinces, to ensure the health and safety of all Canadians. And in this particular case, we're going to take care of our seniors. The member for Louis Saint Laurent. If need be, Quebecers and Canadians are looking at the arrogance of this Liberal Prime Minister. He said that if there are needs, well, I know the needs of people in my riding. They're really happy to serve Canadians. But once again, the Prime Minister has shown his spite for Quebecers, and he's not respecting provincial jurisdiction. When will he understand that Canada needs work with the provinces and not against the provinces? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have always recognized and will always recognize provincial jurisdiction, and we're also recognized that we have to work together during a pandemic that is unprecedented. This crisis means that all levels of government have to work together to protect Canadians, to restart the economy. We can't play petty politics like the members across the way. We're going to work with the premiers and with Canadians to deliver on measures that will help everyone. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. After a second wave of COVID-19, the Quebec Premier and his counterparts came to Ottawa last week with a simple message: help us. They asked for funding to fight the COVID-19 virus. And this is why the speech from the throne is an insult for them. No one word about health transfers. No money. Just lectures and interference, Mr. Speaker. In the midst of a pandemic, will the Prime Minister increase health transfers? Or will he be creating other disputes with Quebec? I was very happy to work with all members on this House during this pandemic, and I'm sorry that there's some members who forgot what we did just a few months ago. We increased health transfers. We're already talking about $40 billion a year, and $2 billion was given at the beginning of this pandemic, and once again, we're talking about $19 billion that we're sending to the provinces to ensure a safe restart. And I also committed directly with the Premier and other. Yes, I said we're going to talk about health transfers to ensure that Canada can properly serve its citizens. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Deputy PM explained that her government is refusing to increase health transfers in the throne speech because the government must justify the reasons for its spending to Canadians. The reason for this spending, Mr. Speaker, is it COVID-19? This is the worst pandemic of our century. We're talking about 5,800 deaths in Quebec. Does the government realize that we're in the midst of a second wave and increase health transfers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we increased health transfers by $500 million right from the onset of this pandemic, and throughout. We also sent $19 billion to provinces for a safe restart. We've sent $2 billion directly to help children to go back to school, and we're going to continue to be there to work with the provinces to help Canadians to stay healthy and to restart our economy, whether it's with CERB that will now be transferred to the EI. We're going to continue to be there for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Burnaby Sud. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. People are worried. Numbers are rising, and we are clearly facing a second wave of COVID-19. But at the same time, the Prime Minister didn't really give us a plan. What is the plan for more COVID testing? What's the plan for our seniors in long-term care homes? What is the plan to make sure that it's not everyday Canadians that are paying the cost of this recovery, but companies that made big profits during this company that pay the price? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, I'm very happy to highlight how we do have an approach that will first and foremost recognize that we are in the midst of a pandemic still and that it's ongoing and people still need help. And that is why we're going to continue to work with the provinces to accelerate the testing process and to make sure that everyone has access to testing. We're going to be there to help our seniors because we've always committed to do so. We're going to help our young people. We're going to help families with the ongoing support for families through EI. And we're going to support our small companies with measures to spur the economic recovery. We're going to continue to be there for them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are in the midst of a second wave. There are numbers increasing and people are deeply worried. But the Prime Minister still hasn't laid out clear plans for some of the most concerning parts of this pandemic. What is the plan to make sure people have access to testing? What's the plan to make sure our seniors are no longer bearing the brunt of COVID-19? What's the plan to make sure families who need childcare can get access to it? And what's the plan to make sure, when we get past the second wave, that it isn't everyday families struggling to get by that pay the price, but those who have profited off this pandemic who pay the price for the recovery?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the throne speech delivered by the Governor-General yesterday lays out our approach in all those elements. We're going to be supporting, moving forward, continuing to build on what we've done for childcare, continuing what we're doing on supporting families across the country, making sure that while we're dealing with this health crisis, we are there to continue to have Canadians' backs. The plan we laid out is a bold one that touches on the economy, the environment, health and safety, and the questions of fairness and the barriers facing too many Canadians still. We will continue to work together to deliver for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, Tokyo Airport started using rapid COVID-19 tests. And these are different tests than the Prime Minister outlined this morning that take hours to get and days to receive the results. They're different. So when the Health Minister found out that this technology was available, why didn't she pull her officials into the office and say, when is this review going to be done? When is this going to be available to Canadians? So the question, very bluntly, is this. On what day will the COVID-19 rapid test reviews be complete?
Good question. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And throughout this pandemic, what we have done is rely on the expertise of the researchers, the scientists, and the experts to guide us in the measures that we're taking to respond to COVID-19. We'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, because we know that, in fact, science and research is the key that to unlock the next set of tools that Canadians and, in fact, all global citizens are waiting for. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, I believe the information the Minister has relied upon to date is that COVID-19 is not transmitted to person. Masks don't work. Border controls are quasi-racist. That's the information she's relying upon. So forgive us if we don't believe her. Why is she apologizing for Chinese numbers on COVID-19 transition? Why is she trusting Chinese numbers more than reviews from tests that Japan has approved?
The Honourable Minister.
What
Seem to have had a technical difficulty. I want to make sure everybody's got their mute on, and we'll ask the Minister of Health to start her answer. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the member opposite may realize, science evolves. And in fact, when COVID-19 first arrived on the global stage, not a lot was known about the virus. And every step of the way, we've worked with researchers, scientists, and the excellent public health officers across the country to ensure that our response meets the new understandings as they evolve. Mr. Speaker, this is a dynamic situation. Of course, our advice will change as the science changes around the coronavirus. I'm proud of the medical community and the hardworking research community.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
But it's been half a year and other developed countries have got it done. And Mr. Speaker, apparently elite billionaires on private jets get special treatment when they fly into Canada. When Canadians found that out last week, the Public Safety Minister actually claimed he didn't know about it. So let's get this straight. In the middle of a pandemic that has locked down our country and almost shut down our economy, the Liberals don't know who or how many are receiving exemptions from the 14-day mandatory quarantine at the border?
Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to take the opportunity to point out that the reporting on this incident was false, and unfortunately, the member opposite may not have heard that there were no national interest exemptions issued in this case. The decision was made by a Border Service officer based on the information that he was provided at the time of entry for those two individuals. And the information that was provided, unfortunately, was not sufficient to allow entry. We've acknowledged that the border officer in that case made a mistake, and those people should not have been admitted. And I've spoken to the head of the CPSA, and it won't happen again.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
For more than 6 months ago, Conservatives said the Liberals should shut down the border to block the virus and save Canadian lives. But now the minister is actually admitting that after they dithered and delayed and did it anyway, now they actually don't have control, or he's pretending they don't. And the Liberals gave a pass to hundreds of rich, connected travellers. But the minister personally rejected the fiancé of a Canadian who's sick with cancer. Quite the double standard. Meanwhile, everyday Canadians, businesses and families still face uncertainty at the border. So how many more elite billionaires are getting special treatment?
The minister.
I'll point out again that no elite billionaires were given special treatment, and they will not receive special treatment. The rules that have been put in place to maintain the integrity of our borders and the safety of Canadians are clear and enforced by our Border Service officers. We also have a process in place to deal with those cases of compassion so that we can determine whether or not they are necessary for entry, and that it can be done safely. We'll work with our public health authorities and with the provincial public health authorities. Mr. Speaker, our first priority will always be the protection, health and safety of Canadians.
The Honourable for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised Canadians that we'd have a transparent government, but now we've seen that he would not fulfill this promise. The proof: the media released news that there was a flagrant conflict of interest in terms of COVID-19. When will the Prime Minister make this information public? He knew this, but he was hiding it from Canadians. Why? The Honourable Minister.
Pour la question.
I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I would like some clarification about the question. I'm not sure what the member is referring to now. What is the issue? The Honourable for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. I have a second question, but I'll repeat it to be kind with the minister. The vaccine committee that was established by the government in August had an issue. There were people on the committee that had potential conflicts of interest that were dangerous, but people weren't aware of this. And CBC Radio Canada broke that news.
Promises he can't keep, but his weak sauce when it comes to delivery. Now, reforestation is important. Many communities in my riding, forestry, particularly lumber mills, are the largest private sector employers. Without a vibrant private sector, there is no funding for the public sector. Mr. Speaker, please join me in thanking the many young Canadians in British Columbia who spent their summer planting these 300 million trees for all of us.
The honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Mr. Speaker, September 18, 2020 was a dark day that mourned the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Although she was a petite woman, she established herself as a giant on whose shoulders we stand. As a law professor, a lawyer, judge, and justice, she basically created the legal concept of gender discrimination and then set about challenging that discrimination in all of its forms. She's gone, but her legacy, the opportunities that she created, the rights she fought for, the status quo that she changed, will live on. This week, we celebrate gender equality in Canada, and I can think of no better time to recognize Justice Ginsburg's legacy. In her own words, as society sees what women can do, as women see what women can do, there will be more women out there doing things and will be better off for it. May her memory be a blessing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, since early this year, New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs and his team have worked to successfully limit the spread of COVID-19 in New Brunswick. Thanks to his PC government recognizing the havoc the virus would unleash, they put in place measures early on to protect New Brunswickers. His hard work was recognized by voters on September 14th, when they elected 27 PC MLAs to lead New Brunswick with a majority government. I was also proud to see all PC MLAs elected across my riding of Fundy Royal, including Premier Blaine Higgs, Gary Crosman, Bill Oliver, Bruce Fitch, Sherry Wilson, Ross Wetmore, Mike Collin, Glenn Savoy, and Tammy Scott Wallace. On behalf of myself and our entire Conservative caucus, I wish to congratulate Premier Higgs and his team on the election results. We look forward to working with him in the months and years ahead.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, a single mom working back-to-back shifts to make ends meet cannot stand for 7 hours in line for a COVID-19 test. People in rural, remote communities or living on reserve need quick access and readily available testing options. And as Dr. Colin Furness, an infection control epidemiologist and assistant professor at the University of Toronto, said, as a screening tool, saliva tests would let parents test their kids and themselves regularly. Canadians are struggling. This government needs to realize that the expectation of a quarantine for 14 days if you come in contact with a case is elitist. Several of our close allies, including Germany, the USA, and Japan, have rapid testing options. Meanwhile, our government continues to drag its heels on reviewing these technologies, and that's why Canadians, Conservatives, continue to call on the Prime Minister to finally do his job and both expeditiously and fulsomely review these testing options. Canadians are depending on this.
The honourable member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Recently, the professor at the University of Montreal, Frédéric Bédard, wrote a work entitled La Terre est une poubelle en feu, or a burning garbage can. The Earth is a burning garbage can. With major forest fires in California, it's not just a picture, but a real sad reality. The Liberals have to realize that there is a health and economic crisis, but the climate crisis hasn't disappeared. The government is sending contradictory signals that are causing confusion. They're continuing to subsidize the oil and gas companies. They're relaunching gas exploration in the Atlantic. They're wasting billions on the expansion of Trans Mountain. They're opening the door to LNG Quebec, and they're getting further and further away every year from our greenhouse gas targets, reductions targets. It's time for an ambitious plan. We have to electrify our transportation system. It's time for a consistent, ambitious plan, as I said, to be capable to ensure that we have a viable planet for future generations. The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to pay tribute in the House to the 50th anniversary of the Saint-Jérôme Cégep. 50 years dedicated to shaping society for today and tomorrow. What a great history. Founded back in 1970, the Saint-Jérôme Cégep offers today some 30 training programs, has 2 technology transfer centers, and 3 campuses in the Laurentians. It goes without saying that this Cégep is a major cultural and socio-economic player in the development of Rivière-du-Nord, the Laurentians, and all of Quebec. In its 50 years, the Cégep has had over 35,000 graduates. I salute and thank the work of all the staff, both past and present. In particular, the dedicated work being done by its current Director General, Ms. Nadine Legal, in 2020. There are more than 700 people who work every day to ensure the Cégep can work properly. As the President says, we're bigger together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are outraged. Canada has been dealing with the coronavirus for over 8 months now, and the government has to be urged to approve a rapid test. During the throne speech yesterday, the Governor-General clearly indicated that Canadians should not have to spend hours in line to get a test. In Kitchener, Ontario, on Wednesday, the media indicated that people had started to wait for a drive-through test starting at 2:30 in the morning. Health Canada has received 14 applications for rapid tests, but the government has approved none of them. In other jurisdictions, rapid COVID-19 tests take only 15 minutes, cost less than $5, and don't need a lab. It's high time for Canada to adopt rapid testing to ensure that Canada Canadians don't have to worry about their health. Canadians have cooperated with the government to flatten the curve. It's the government's time to cooperate now with Canadians. The honourable member for Moncton Riverview, Dieppe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, we lost a great lady, one of our great love stories of the time. We learned of the death of Hélène Chrétien, the spouse of the former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Canada is poor for its loss. She was not just a great Canadian, a great Quebecer, and a woman who sacrificed so much for her country. But when her husband was the member for Beauséjour in New Brunswick, she left her mark on the Acadians in our province. She adopted Acadia, and it was reciprocal because Acadians respected her deeply. She had a great friendship with another great lady, Viola Légère, former senator of New Brunswick, and who played the famous La Sagouine character. I'd like to remind people that it wasn't the Prime Minister who appointed her to the Senate, but Ms. Chrétien. On behalf of all Canadians, I would like to offer my sincerest condolences to the Chrétien family and thank them for their great contribution. Yesterday, I had the privilege of speaking with Mr. Chrétien himself, and he asked me to thank all of the MPs in this House, the government, former colleagues, and all Canadians for their condolences and sharing their thoughts and memories of this incredible woman, his dear beloved Hélène.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Agriculture sector, families, community organizations, and small businesses form the core of these farms, cultivations, and small operations. They feed our cities, they sustain our export to the world, and they play a critical part in our communities. Water and Grain, a grain farm that diversifies in many products, including canola, keeps our markets supplied and provides Canadian products to the world. We must support them against China's coercive diplomacy. Riverbend Gardens provide domestic food to local markets to sell quality and healthy alternative products grown at home here in Canada. Lady Flower Gardens provide food to our food bank, also create opportunities for our Indigenous peoples. Efforts like these represents the goodwill of the agriculture producers. The federal government must support them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before we continue, I just want to take this opportunity to remind the honourable members, as we get into something new, the members who are joining us from home. In the House, you have to stand up to be recognized, which has been done for years. From home, please turn on your cameras well in advance. Don't wait till the last second. That is just your way of standing up remotely. It just makes it easier to deal with any technological problem that we may incur as we go.